Welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Gorse, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey of remembering our divine nature and tapping into the truths that shall set us free. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I am beyond excited. I know I say that every time, but like legit today, I'm so excited to welcome guest Mark Groves to the show. Mark, if you don't know him, although everyone I've talked to today was like, oh my God, I've followed him forever. I love Mark. I'm so excited for you. So he's got fans everywhere. Mark Groves is a human connection specialist, founder of Create the Love, author of new book, Liberated Love, with your partner, Kylie, and host of the Mark Groves podcast. He's a speaker, writer, motivator, creator, and collaborator. Mark's work bridges the academic and the human, inviting people to explore the good, the bad, the downright ugly, and the beautiful sides of connection. His purpose? To empower individuals to step into their power, transform the way they relate to themselves and others, and create authentic change for a life and love they'll look back on with a resounding fuck yes. I love saying that word. Sorry to the people that don't like saying that.
I was like, oh, we use the F word in my bio. That's great.
Yeah, I know. Did you not know that?
I did, but I forgot.
I know. I think we did lose like a newsletter subscriber once because I cursed, but God bless
Good
him.
riddance.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I love you. If you don't like cursing, that's fine.
I get it. My daughter charges me $20. He has appeared on episodes Heal Squad with my dear friend Maria Menounos, also Danica Patrick's Pretty Intense, another great friend, Align Podcast, Girls Gotta Eat, and way more. Welcome to the show.
And thanks so much for having me. You know, I read once that people who use curse words have a higher level of intelligence, which I actually think was probably someone who curses a lot who did the study. So there might be a bias in it.
I mean, look, I would agree. Yes, absolutely. Liberated Love, you're living the example. And how in the world, I mean, you and Kylie, I think from the sounds of the book, you guys both have clients, you work and coach people. What is your background? How did you come to be this enlightened love guru that you are?
Well, let's not call me that, because I'll get a cosmic 2x4 to the head to remind me that I'm not. I mean, my work is really writing from the place of what I learn. So, you know, I say to people, I'm in the trenches with you. Like, I'm learning this stuff as I go. And it wasn't until, you know, this will be interesting because I'm not sure you actually knew this about me, but I was obsessed about how to get people to change human behavior because I was in pharma for 14 years. Wow. Yeah, so I was a pharma rep. And before that, I was really, I've always been really curious about why people do what they do. But the origin really came from my dad. My dad would sit down with me and talk to me about relationship stuff, talk to me about my relationship stuff, and we'd sort of philosophize the human experience. So he'd ask me lots of questions, which I feel like set the precedent for curiosity. And it wasn't until my own relational blunders that I used to think I was really good at love. And my brother used to make fun of me and say that I loved love. Like, oh, you love falling in love. And I didn't really have an argument back because the evidence was pretty clear. I sort of identify with the idea that, you know, women have this idea of their wedding day and sold this idea from Disney, blah, blah, blah. I really was like excited about entering relationship. I was excited about having a girlfriend. And when I went through a breakup in my late 20s, I remember thinking to myself, like, why am I so good at talking about everything but my feelings? Why am I so good at relationships except for romantic ones? Like, none of this made logical sense. And I left an engagement and I thought to myself, why, when I feel more connected to me than I ever have, maybe in, 10 years, do I feel so judged by the people around me for my relationship endings or failing? And so that I was a rep at the time, and I was really interested in science. So I was like, well, I'll just go into the linear nature, study the logistical, factual, scientific reasons that relationships work, why they don't. That inevitably brings you to things like the Gottman's work. And at the same time, I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And that was the first time I ever even thought about existentialism and like, maybe I'm here for more than just to be a provider and get a house and a car and have kids. And I didn't realize that what was being born from me was a mission of like, as I was learning, I'm like, why do people not learn this? Why didn't they teach me this in school? You know, I always joke that I've never used the Pythagorean theorem since I learned it.
Right.
But I could have used how to manage conflict, how to, you know, anything else.
Feel your feelings and identify them. Yes.
Yeah, and you know, I was really, the more I woke up to the understanding of the importance of self-awareness, emotional regulation, I started to see the correlation to what I was doing for work, the correlation to inflammation. And I remember when I watched Heal, I felt so validated in a lot of my theories because I believe there were 9 things that they say everyone...
Yeah, the 9 essentials for healing.
Right. And I believe like 7 of them are relational or emotional, you know, a combination of 2. And that also really couples with like Bronnie Ware's work on the 5 regrets of the dying. She was a palliative care nurse. And I just thought, man, we are here to love. And our health is so predicated on our ability to connect well, which again, validated by research. And so I'm like, why are we not taught this? Like, is there some sort of conspiracy? They want us to get divorced? Like, come on. Anyways,
well, it's working. The statistics are dismal for divorce. But yeah, as you know, are talking, it reminds me of one of the quotes in the book was, you know, our deepest fear is, or our greatest need is connection. And then our greatest fear is that of exile, like of being abandoned or alone on the island. And we're such village people, you know? Mm-hmm. And so much is around security and safety. And it's just, as I'm reading this book, as with many of my interviews, I'm getting the information I need right in that moment of my life that I need it. and I realize I've heard attachment style, you know, thousands of times, especially over the last few years of Heal. And I'm reading, I was like, oh, I'm for sure that one. And my husband's that one. And then I was like, oh, wait a second, it's the opposite. And then I'm like, well, maybe it's nuance and we're like a little bit of each. Can you talk about attachment styles? Because if people aren't aware of how much they drive the different relationships we can kind of attract and repeat over our lives, it's like, I mean, we have to know this about ourselves in order to kind of heal those original wounds.
Yeah, I mean, if you learn about your attachment style, you'll be in the top 1% of people's awareness about how they relate. It'll also make a lot of things make sense. You know, I think whenever we use words like attachment style or codependency, which, you know, is sort of the whole exploration of the book is how to release codependent patterns. These are overlaying ways that we systemize relating, right? They just make what we do and the patterns we do make sense. And really, humans don't have that much diversity to their problems. I know we might think ourselves egoically we're different than everyone else, but we really organize in very similar ways. And what I mean by that is like attachment, which the work, and actually one of the founding educators on it, Dr. Sue Johnson, just passed. Mm-hmm. So like she was just such a teacher of it. And so there's her work, and then there's early studies that really it's founded upon. And what they did was they looked at, mom was in a room with a toddler, mom would leave the room, come back, and they'd look at how the toddler responded to mom, the baby responded to mom. And what they saw was like, okay, mom leaves the room, mom comes back, baby goes to mom and stays by mom's side. So afraid, like, if you leave, I'm not sure you'll come back. Anxious attachment. Mom leaves, mom comes back, baby reunites with mom, goes back to playing. Secure attachment. Mom leaves, mom comes back, baby's like, I didn't even really notice you were gone, no big deal. But physiologically, that baby's responding the same way as the first one. So it's presenting as ambivalence, but it's actually deep concern. And that's avoidance. So in the book, we walk through how the nervous system overlaps with attachment styles. And one way I like to simply explain to people is your attachment style is just what your possible most likely response is when a relationship has the signs of insecurity. Like, humans are always asking 2 questions. Am I safe? And the second question is, am I safe to be myself? And if being myself threatens number 1, then I'll abandon me to keep the connection. So when you think about an anxious person, and you think about how I relate to the space between me and another person. So if we have too much space, an anxious person doesn't like having too much space. An avoidant person doesn't like having no space. So their needs are in opposition of one another. And there are strategies for handling a relationship that seems like it has a lack of safety. And I'm not just talking physical, I just mean like, will you be there for me, right? Like that's the question we're always asking ourselves anyways. So one person pushes it away and the other person clings. Now, the reason this is important to understand is we generally have a way that we're more likely to do it. So I'm sure if you're watching or listening, like you're like, I'm the one who gets anxious and then I over-text, I over-communicate, I need to resolve the problem right away. I can't just be in my feelings. From a nervous system lens, that anxiously attached people have a hard time self-regulating. So the way that they soothe is by connecting. Avoidantly attached people have a hard time co-regulating, which means being in the space of another nervous system. Like you and I talking right now, our nervous systems are communicating. We have mirror neurons. There's lots of things happening. And that's why when someone has an experience like a good trigger, like someone who can listen, who's present, these things can trigger us because we don't trust them. So, for us to just be able to put a label to a behavior, but not a label to ourselves. And that way you're not putting your identity into, like, I am anxiously attached is very different than I am predisposed or I can possibly become anxious when. Then it's not static, because everyone can become secure. In the book it's called Earn Secure. So everyone can learn how to become secure.
Do you want to, or I can read the definition of codependency. Do you know it off the top of your head?
I have the verbatim.
Okay.
I'm maybe not verbatim. Any relational dynamic where we source security, safety at the cost of our own needs, sense of self, overall well-being. So the idea there is like at the expense of. So any relational dynamic where I source safety at the expense of myself and my own needs, my own wants. Now we tend to identify, like the word codependent really comes originally from addiction spaces. And the first book really written on it, which is exceptional, is by Melody Beattie called Codependent No More. But it was really about being in a relationship with an addict. And really like, how do I save them? But foregoing my own needs, my own desires. So really the behaviors that would look like what is not liberated love would be like trying to save people, trying to change people, putting everyone else ahead of ourselves, presenting or needing to be saved, because that's the other side of the dynamic, right? Is like when you think about it in relationships, a lot of people don't know how to relate to each other from a healthy place. Like one person seems to always have a challenge or a problem, like they're never emotionally intelligent enough, they're the ones who need to learn how to communicate better, and the other one's like, you need to do this, you need to read this, you need to change this. But if both of them have to step out of their adaptive roles, now we're cooking. Now we can go to another level of relationship. But it requires stepping into a space of uncertainty, because like if I'm the one who's always getting you to listen to a podcast or read a book, and I think we could probably generalize that it's usually the woman trying to get the man to change something. Again, I'm just generalizing, but it could be the opposite. And it's usually the man who's like, here she goes again, right? Like she wants me to read this thing. So what happens if I'm the one trying to get you to change, then there's a hierarchy. I'm good and you're not. So we can't meet each other. And I need you to have a problem because that's what makes me feel needed. So I actually am committed and addicted to you needing to change. Because by doing that, I can intuit your needs. And if I can intuit your needs, then you need me. So I create a sense of false safety. And so we learn these roles as children. And the person who has the problems keeps problems because that's what keeps people feeling worthy in their life. They feel unworthy, but that's part of the dynamic. Make sense?
Totally.
Yeah. Not a fun dynamic.
And it's all subconscious. So
yeah, exactly.
You're not aware that you're doing it, and then what fascinates me, and people can call it the law of attraction, but because of that nervous system frequency, or just maybe the intelligence of the universe and the information that our mental state is putting out into the world, we literally, it's like a puzzle. We attract that perfect balance of like their mask meeting my mask.
Making sweet love.
But then it's not authentic. So underneath, it's like it's eventually going to blow up because it's the mask and the mask that's fitting together. And
yeah, there's a desperation to be seen.
Yeah. And yet, which is what I'm going through right now, it's like you so desperately want to be seen, but you're not showing them your authentic self because you're so afraid if you do, you won't be loved and you'll be abandoned and exiled.
Yeah, and I feel you on that, because what happens then is you live in the space of abandonment, right? It's like, I'm afraid if I show you me, you won't love me for who I am, so I'll show you who I think you want to see, but then I'll feel like I don't love myself. Right? I feel
like I'm on Barbara Walters right now. I'm starting to cry, Mark. Damn it.
On Barbara Walters. Yeah.
Yep. Totally.
But deep breath into that, because that's the recognition that we've been wearing masks. And a mask is a disservice to love. But we learn it somewhere. That's why in the book we walk through the context. Like, where did you learn this? Because you might have the awareness of it today, but at some point it was the smartest thing to do, to maintain connection, to maintain safety, to maintain relationship. And I always think like we have to be compassionate to that, because one, if you exile it or shame it, then you can't learn from it. Because ultimately, let's say I was 4 when I learned that. I want to say thank you to the 4-year-old. Like, you, without that, you kept us safe. And now I'm mad at you for keeping us safe, because now as an adult, I'm going, doesn't work anymore. And the 4-year-old's like, well, you needed me before. Now you don't. And so we often reject what we're ashamed of. And when we do that, we reject the wisdom that's innate in the experience. Because if we actually sat with the 4-year-old and said, tell me about it. Tell me about the grief. Tell me that you couldn't express anger. What was that like? Because then when you see that you repress something, like, how old are you now? Am I allowed to ask?
Yeah, of course. I have no shame here. 45.
Yeah, good. I'm
feeling
like,
fantastic.
Exactly. I'm 45 too.
Oh,
yeah.
high five.
Yeah, sweet. When we actually look at it from that lens of like, okay, I'm 45, I look back upon my life, I now have an awareness. That means I see everything I've done in my life through the new lens of awareness. So I can now look at a Rolodex of every moment in my life that I wore a mask. And then what happens is there's a parallel life that shows itself. Well, had I done things differently now that I have this new lens of awareness, I would be in a different place. Not true. That's like just causes more suffering. Because now we're like, oh, there's this other life where everything was good and there's no problems, because I was totally awakened along that. And you realize that there's no ending to it, you know?
Yeah. What are your spiritual beliefs? I like to dive right into that one, because, like, do you feel that you come in here, like, kind of human life is kind of a classroom and our soul chooses what we're going to learn, and there's free will, so there might be like different doors, but we're ultimately going to end up on that same river of learning those lessons?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're here. You might as well take the curriculum. You know, I think it is by design that you're drawn to people who wound you in a familiar way so you can heal. Like, my wife and I's agreement is, let's use our relationship to free each other. Not from each other, from ourselves. From, like, why not use the material and friction you have with people at work, with your body, with the way that you because to me, like, ultimate healing is through being regulated. Like, I think the nervous system is really a window to, like, or the tether between the worlds. You know, and I think because we have a prefrontal cortex, we have a lot of arrogance. Like, we think, oh, we're beyond every other mammal, we're beyond every other plant, we're beyond, and then we don't realize we're like meat suits walking around with personalities and beliefs and experiences, but we still have to do the human part. You know, and I think when we start to see all of life's experiences as an education, which the complexity of holding that is that if I go, okay, well, everything in my life has happened up until this point to teach me. And I can either be stuck by that and be a victim of my circumstances, or I can rise from them. Now, the real, I think it's a sacred tension that must be held there, is that acknowledging that something is freeing you from patterns that you might have inherited. It might be soul contracts, whatever the belief is. It really doesn't matter to me. But it's like, can you hold the complexity that it can be true that you can be a victim of an experience and still use what you've been through to come most alive, to become more powerful? Like if you couldn't have access to your voice because you were 4 and you went through something, then in service of that 4-year-old, you must access your voice today. And that's why we repeat patterns, because we learn to suppress something. And then every time we get to a moment that is similar, we keep taking a right turn. So we keep doing a circle. But if we can actually go back to the original wound, then we can see what skill did I actually need here. Not that it was available because I was 4. And if I had said F you to my dad, I could have gotten hurt. But can I access that today without minimizing the experience of the 4-year-old? That's the tension that has to exist. And, often if I express that, I have to use all these qualifiers because the idea is, well, that's victim blaming. I'm like, no. We're not negating the experience of the victim. We're just saying we don't have to live there. Because if we live there, then we repeat it. Because then I just live a life where I'm looking for all the ways that it's not fair. And I'm human. I'm predisposed to these things. It's not like I'm like, oh, it's done. I wrote a book. It's like, no, hell no. Yeah. I just had a kid. That's like a whole new education.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, liberated love.
Had a child.
Kids into the mix.
Yeah, put them back in the prison.
Volume 2.
Yeah. Well, I just realized there's just more material to work with now.
Yeah.
I have less sleep, more material. I realize, I'm not as good of a communicator as I thought. More material. Instead of seeing it as a deficit, I see it as an opportunity.
Yeah. And your level of awareness automatically upgrades because you're like, oh, I'm aware that I am now creating the container that my child is developing their attachment style. And so you're just a little more careful about not letting your triggers, rip you down the river.
Yeah, pass on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the work.
But it's such a, you're already reparenting yourself in your relationship, and sitting with that, like, trigger, wound, okay, what's that 4-year-old belief or 2-year-old belief, and what are they feeling? Why is my nervous system getting activated? And then holding space for it and just, like, asking questions and do the investigation work. And you said something, ultimately healing is, like, regulating the nervous system, and you also said something in the book about, like, just because we've done all this work and done so much healing, which I have, and also realizing I don't even know my attachment style, really. So I need to get to that.
It can change, so maybe you just shifted gears.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you said it's not like your triggers ever go away.
Yeah.
But they must soften, right? If you get the ability to have the awareness, you practice long enough and you're aware that you're not in that 4-year-old. You don't go back there. So maybe your nervous system activates, but then you have the tools faster or the awareness faster to regulate and find safety in the moment.
Yeah, you start to orient to the trigger from a place of curiosity and information. So, we know of the idea of something like PTSD, right? When we think of a soldier goes to war, a bomb goes off, their friend dies. They're walking down the street, a car backfires, they're immediately back in the moment somatically, right? Their body responds, they're in panic. And there's no differentiation for them, right? And that's the same for us relationally. Like, when you're a kid, you experience something and what you're taught is how to relate to that emotion. You're taught, like, if I was angry or joyous, I got in trouble, so I'm no longer going to touch that stove. Right? Same idea. And so triggers, I see them more as an opportunity. What happens is the trigger doesn't go away because it's wisdom. It's saying, hey, when I see these circumstances or I feel this feeling, bad might happen or bad did happen. So I'm going to protect from bad. But if we can actually get curious about what happened in that moment, right, and cultivate what behavior do I need access to, what skill do I need to develop? Because relationships really are a set of skills. Like, there's not a secret to them. Like, we know what's the number one most important skill to learn in relating: communication. Yet we're all like I'm going to stay defensive, stay critical, still shut down. So what happens is you start to orient to the trigger differently. So it's not about getting rid of it. It's about seeing it as information. And then, there's a saying that the opposite of trauma is choice. So now I can be discerning about it. Okay, I feel triggered right now. Is it an appropriate response to the circumstances? Well, now that I'm curious about it and I'm not judging my trigger or reacting from it, I'm taking responsibility now. So I'm looking at it and I'm going, is it appropriate? No, it's actually not. Am I safe? I am safe. So now I'm in choice. So I'm not letting the trigger run my life. I'm running my life. But I'm not saying the trigger is bad, because ultimately when we look at a trigger and it's destroyed our relationships, let's say I've gotten really reactive, I over pursue, someone like put up a boundary and I lost my mind. Because what that will do generally is, and I think this is the birth of all introspection, is that all introspection comes from a place of it. First, there's a problem I have. I have a problem, which is usually correlated with I am a problem. So it's correlated with self-worth. So what turns us towards self-awareness and change and growing, and I think this is true of any form of healing, is like I have a health thing, I got to change it. Mm-hmm. Is at some point we have to pivot the intention of why we're changing. So if what brings me to personal growth is correlated to an identity that I'm inadequate or I'm not good enough, mm-hmm. then eventually when I start to get information, let's say from my partner, says to me, hey, I have some feedback for you. I mean, who likes that line, right? It's even structured well. It's structured like in a way that likely is not going to be it might trigger anyone, right? But can I also breathe in, okay, here's some information I'm about to get that I'm allowed to verify as true or not. And it's an invitation to grow. Okay, so it's not evidence of my inadequacy anymore. It's evidence of my possibility. And I think when we relate, I have a friend who had stage 4 melanoma, and he's since in remission. And they told him, you got to join the Fuck Cancer group. And he's like, wait, but cancer is me. Like, why would I say fuck cancer? He was like, I'm rejecting a part of myself, which is probably in the origin of some of the mechanism of action. And he's so great at telling that story, and I don't want to do a disservice to it, but I was like, wow, that's so profound. Mm-hmm. And I think the same way of like you learn something about what you've done relationally, like maybe you cheat, and then it wakes you up. I can't believe who I am. I would never do that, but you did it. Mm-hmm. Okay, can you be with that now? Okay, so it's not an evidence that you're a crappy person. It's evidence that you have possibility to change, to heal something. And that's a sensitive subject. And of course, I'm not talking about the repeat infidelity cheaters. That's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. Worms being the operative word.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so, just the way you put that is so beautiful, because I think we're in this cancel culture and this crazy divisive like social media and like there just needs to be, I mean, I'm the worst. I'm so critical of myself because of my upbringing. I blame them. No, I'm kidding. But like I have a self-critical judgment thing that many of us have. And, but just to allow ourselves to be human. We don't have to be, the goal is not to ever make mistakes, and we may hurt someone. So there's repair, and it's just, it's being able to be honest with yourself, so that you can be honest with others, and also like have grace with your process, and you will fuck up along the way, so that's just, it's such a great reminder to not condemn ourselves and to start to practice like, okay, that was me being scared, that overreaction or that terrible choice or me escaping through drugs and alcohol, that was just me avoiding pain, and
right.
Just to learn and like have grace, and then start to learn to sit with that and change the behavior.
Well, and like, even if we can say, okay, well, we're going to use our relationship to free ourselves from wearing masks. Okay, how do we even begin to expose ourselves to that possibility? Because for people who've been in a relationship a long time, that means you're changing the way the relationship works. Now, can we actually create underlying agreements that create safety so that we can start to take the masks off? But we would have conversations like, what does that mean for you? What makes you most afraid revealing parts of yourself you haven't revealed? What masks do you wear? Why do you wear them? So we're really starting to get into like that's truly what being seen is, right? And if a relationship can hold that, well, if it can't, it will fall away. But what I know to be true is that when one person or both people, but especially one, says, I'm no longer going to participate in this, they're taking a stand for love. They're taking a stand for possibility, but they're taking a stand for both people. And I would argue that, let's say they're in a family, and then they're in a family system, and then they're in a community, they're actually taking a stand for all of those things. Because everyone, what we call our personality is generally our adaptive strategies from our childhood.
Yeah.
So I'm a perfectionist. No, you're not. You're someone who needed to become that in order to create some form of safety. And that's okay. It could be driving why you do what you do. You could be an overachiever, but really that's because you thought if you achieved enough, they'd finally notice you and see your value and then love you and ride off into the sunset. But of course, that never actually happens. Just like the trick of the perfectionist is like, as soon as you achieve something, you'll be not enough somewhere else. So it's like, can we actually just be with the reality of it? So as you said, enter grace. There's no one to villainize. Like, there's no one to blame. It is exactly as it needed to be to get to the moment where you recognize it. And if we can say to each other, okay, let's have a fierce dedication to telling the truth first. And I think for a lot of relationships, especially codependent relationships, but I would argue this is why most relationships are codependent till they're not, is that there's a romantic ideal about abandoning your own needs, your own self, and your own dreams, and your own possibilities, your own voice. And we could even look at how history has shaped that, especially for women. I'm too much, I'm too emotional. If I speak up, I lose access to resources, which is ultimately safety. And now you're seeing those structures change, flip, all the things. But it's like, okay, but I'm no longer going to do it, because me not telling you the truth is me not honoring me, but me not honoring you. If I don't believe you can handle a truth, so I hold it back, I get to blame you for not sharing it. Because it's your capacity that's the problem. But I have to be willing to give you something to hold that you've never held before, so you can expand your capacity. And this is why I think all of this is so correlated to our health. Because if you think about the rise of things like autoimmune is, how it's shortly described, is the body attacking itself, right? But if you're in opposition to your own expression, then you're actually the creation of that. And if we're taught that as children because of, let's say, things like trauma, we don't want to villainize it. Oh, I'm the one who causes my own. Is that what you're saying? No, but can we create a harmonious environment, because then the body at least will have the opportunity to heal. You look at gut issues. Gut issues like things like irritable bowel syndrome, things like that, highly correlated to trauma and correlated to things, because are you perfusing blood to the gut when you're in fight, flight, freeze, fawn? No. And people pleasing is fawning. That's the nervous system in a state of fawn. Indecision, stuck in constant indecision, never being able to complete something. Functional freeze, right? So you're seeing that these are all serving us, but they're not creating a harmonious environment in our bodies. And when someone finally gets their nervous system to a state of regulation, it's amazing. They leave the relationship they've always wanted to leave. And then all of a sudden they're like, my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. And they're like, And I was wondering, if you just asked your body, what are you telling me? The body will tell you. You might not like what it says, but it'll tell you.
Yeah, I love it. You use the term, which shockingly I don't think I've ever heard, of somatic literacy. I talk about it, and your symptoms are just feedback from your body's trying to talk to you, and it's going to start as a whisper, then it's going to get a little louder, then it's going to smack you over the head with that 2x4. But as you're talking, I'm just seeing and I had a similar conversation yesterday in an interview, but it's, the opposite of dis-ease is obviously ease. And when we are our authentic selves, we don't have to think or expend extra energy putting up a mask or manipulating to try to, gain safety and attachment from people. So, when we are, and the other thing you said that I think is brilliant in the book, you say, we may lose some people and some relationships when we are authentic and show up as our authentic selves and have the courage to drop the masks, but we're going to gain those authentic matches, So I don't know. I just like you. It's this conversation is just so important. Oh my God. Anyways, I can't.
It's always amazing how it shows up when we need it.
We do.
The other day I had a YouTube video suggestion that I was like, damn it. It was like exactly, it was Ram Dass, and it was like, you might want to listen to this. And I was like, yep, that's actually exactly what I needed to hear.
And that's what happens when you're in, synchronicity. Boundaries aren't walls. They are doorways to deeper levels of love and intimacy. That's such a great reframe. Talk to us about boundaries, because I have a hard time saying no sometimes. And really, again, it's just that fear of, if I really honor my needs and, disappoint someone, piss someone off, miss out on an opportunity, somehow that's threatening my safety. And,
Yeah, again, like if we looked up our maternal family tree or paternal, we'll see, like, when was the last time someone honored their fullest self? When was the last time someone honored a no? What happened when they honored a no? We might have to go up quite a few generations. We might not even know the full story, right? So I always think, like, you know how they say that, 90% of our DNA is junk DNA? Only because we don't know what it does, so it's just considered junk. And I just think, like, is that the somatic programming? Like, is that the personality programming that actually comes through our lineage? You know what I mean? And the reason we talk about boundaries being doorways is that I think about, very simply, if you want to live a great life, establish what you value. And most people who have put other people ahead of themselves don't know what they value. They don't know what they need. They don't know what they want. Now, they'll see that as evidence, again, of their inadequacy. I'm saying, go on the beautiful, curious adventure, then, of figuring out who you are. What a gift that is. And if you want a sort of shortcut to that, you can just look at who you admire, because who you admire is usually people who embody values you desire. So that's a great way to just begin to touch it. Now, when I work with people, I'll have them do what I call sentence stems. So they just finish sentences. Because, one, I'm not guiding them, they're finishing them, right? So there's no bias, and I might present a sentence. I'm like, let's see where this goes. It just intuitively comes. And one of the rules of that is they can't say, I don't know. And there's no such thing as saying the wrong thing. And the reason I do that is because when we say I don't know, we've usually subcontracted authority to someone else. We learn to not trust ourselves. So I don't know is sort of a pause to be able to present some space, and maybe someone else will tell me. And so they can't say that, and they have to pick something. And I'm like, and once you pick something, it might be the wrong thing, but you have to pick something so you can start to identify what doesn't fit. Now, once you figure out what you value, which I'd say most people just need to write out, let's say 3 to 5 values. And there'll be core things like health, mental, physical, emotional, being in purpose, having integrity, honesty, truth, like things like that. They then look at their lives, and they can just create a list. Okay, what choices, habits, and people are in my life? Write them out. Are they in alignment with these values? Yes or no? How are they not? Write it out. What would need to change? Is it possible to change in order to get them into alignment? And so then right away, if you clean that list up, your life will be in flow. You'll be in integrity. You'll be in alignment. The boundaries protect the values. So I always think, like, boundaries preserve wholeness. That's what they do. Now, boundaries aren't just about keeping behaviors out. They're about keeping behaviors in. Like, I have a lot of opinions. Boundaries are about containment of those opinions. I'm not always great at it, but that's why I have my own social media platform and my own podcast. You get to decide if you want to listen. But what is great about it is if you start to actually really live that simply, you'll change your life. Your whole life will change. Only because you decided to get everything in integrity with who you truly are. Now, the beautiful thing about boundaries is that they're really, they're movable. So as you get more information, you might change it, right? Like if someone goes through a breach of trust in a relationship, one of the boundaries might be, I get to read your phone. You can no longer communicate with this person, whatever it is. Over time, trust might build up again, and then the boundary moves. I don't need to read your phone anymore. So we have the right to what we desire in order to create safety. just because someone doesn't like your boundary doesn't mean the boundary is not good. Because often when we've existed in relationships are boundaryless, when we start to introduce boundaries, we're shifting the relationship. So the other person will do what Harriet Lerner calls a change-back move. So if you're in a dance, let's say your relationship dance, and this is from her book called Dance of Intimacy. If you're in a dance and let's say the way you relate to them is called the cha-cha, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what? We need to change how we handle conflict. I need to put some boundaries around what I need. And so we start to introduce that. The other person's like, wait, we're doing the two-step now? Let's get back to the cha-cha. So they'll try to do anything to get you to change back because they don't trust the new dynamic. And I would say that's often where we get screwed, is because we go back. We tasted it, and then we go back. We taste our power, we go back. We taste standing in our values, we go back. And that's not an evidence of failure. Again, that's how most people will orient to that. It's an evidence of possibility. You still found a chink in your armor. You still found a spot where you abandon yourself. And I find those things all the time. To me, I'm not going, I suck. It's horrible. There is pain, of course, associated with it because there's new awareness. But it's like, okay. I always think of that quote from Maya Angelou. Like, once you know better, do better. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how many of us know something we're not living?
All of us.
Right, till we're not.
Oh, yeah.
And that's unintegrated wisdom.
Yeah.
Right, which is like normalized. Like people are like, I know this relationship doesn't feel good. Let's stay another 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that friendship's toxic. All they do is criticize me. I guess this is just what friendships are supposed to be like. Like your body is throwing up serious signs. And my wife calls it like your body is the somatic canary in the coal mine. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot about that. Like one of the things that changed for us, and one of the aspects of the book, is we started to see that if something was coming up for one of us, it was coming up for both of us. Maybe the other person just didn't notice it yet. Mm-hmm. And for her, she had a lot of resistance to our relationship. In our first relationship, we call relationship 1.0. And we used to be like, how do we fix that? What therapy do you need to do? What book do you need to read? You're avoidantly attached. Go read this thing about avoidance. But I was like, towards the end of that relationship, I remember saying, what happens if there's actually brilliance in your inability to choose it? Like, what happens if there's something I don't sense that you sense? Because for me, I would be like, as soon as I met someone, like, I guess we're doing this. Like, this is it. So I was bypassing discernment and entering relationship, not actually sure yet they were a good fit for me. Mm-hmm. And then I would be with people who were not a good fit, but it was just so normal for me to completely abandon that sense of choice. For her, it was like a little more distancing. And I started to see that I wasn't actually happy in our old relationship dynamic, and she was saying I couldn't fully choose this, but she was identifying something in me that I learned to ignore. And so I was like, wait, I can't fully choose this. Oh my God, there's brilliance in what was coming up for her. When we had that awareness change, she started crying because she was like, wow, this is the first time I've thought there's not a problem with me. Like there's actually maybe something intelligent in my avoidance. Yeah, it was like complete paradigm shift for both of us. And I saw how I was sourcing power from needing her to figure it out. Because then it wasn't me. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm not bypassing choice. I'm making a choice. It's like, this is a no-brainer. I'm all in. I shouldn't have been all in. Yeah.
I love that radical responsibility. It's like to find yourself in a partnership, whether it's a work relationship, any sort of relating, equal parts are showing up with something that needs to be addressed. And usually when it's not working for one, it's not working for the other, even though consciously they might think it is and might grasp or hold or whatever. How do you know? So 1.0 didn't work out, but you guys had kind of the tools and awareness in the background to go, oh, wait a minute. Let's take the masks off and see if we can use this relationship to heal ourselves together. Do the scary thing, get in the cocoon together, which you say is a coffin and a portal, which I think is brilliant. How do you know if it's like a relationship that just isn't aligned or a relationship that can go to 2.0 with a death of the current? Well,
I think the first thing is you can't seek to know before you go in. Like, if you're going to go into, what we call a sacred pause. Now, for context, her and I broke up. We broke up and we were not getting back together. I was done with that pattern. By the time I met the completion of that, I was like, okay, lesson learned, universe. I'm not going down this one again. Where I was constantly in relationship with people I felt couldn't fully choose me. So I was like, you know what? There's brilliance in me choosing people like that because I don't get to touch the depths of relationship and I get to blame them. And I was like, I'm no longer tolerating that. I want to be fully met, and I'm ready for that. And so when we ended the relationship, it was in service of love. Like, we loved each other deeply. The relationship ended and love deepened, which was crazy to experience because you're taught, hate them, get rid of them, tell your friends to choose a side. Not us. Our friends, loved both of us, cared for both of us. We didn't want them to choose a side. What a immature thing to ask of people. And I would say that if someone is saying, do I stay or go? First off, there's brilliance in the question. It's like, just live the question first. And the need to come to an answer, I'd say there's twofold here. There's a few things that I ask people. If you're not ready to let it go, then both choose to go into, we walk through it in the book, whether you're single, dating, or in a relationship. It's about creating a container is what we call it, which is really a set of agreements that allows you to reset how you relate. And, we talk about like Vipassanas. We don't talk, but we give the example in the book about things like Vipassanas or like going on fast. Like, this is a technology that humans have used forever for transformation and awareness. So we're like, let's create agreements around what are we going to do with our relationship. You have to be willing to let the old one die and the new one be born. If you're single, you have to let the old way of being die and the new way be born. But that means you have to stay in a space of transition, which, if you think about it, we talk about the caterpillar. But it's like, the caterpillar can't leave the cocoon early. If it does, it's like got half a wing. It's like part of its butt is formed, but not full. So there's all these aspects of like, we want to rush transformation. We want to rush answers. What I will say is that often people will spend years looking for an answer to a question that they don't like the answer to. So they try to find the answer to be anything but what they know. The second thing is that I will ask people, is abandoning yourself staying or going? And so for someone who has a predisposition to leaving relationships early or not going all in, or we're afraid of what's on the other side, then maybe staying is the answer. If we spent our lives always staying longer than we should, always trying to fix everything, trying to change everybody, maybe leaving is the answer. Again, I don't know, but the person who's asking the question knows or will know. The thing I always ask myself is there more to learn here? And that answer was yes till it wasn't. And when it wasn't, I couldn't stay longer because I was going to get sick. I could tell. This is why I couldn't stay silent about what was going on in the world with COVID, because I was like, I'm going to get sick. I know that a repression of expression will make me sick. And I also, I think, have that thought or belief anyways, so that I have to be accountable to truth. And I think the last thing I'll say is that even if you break up with somebody and then you miss them and you want them back and you realize that the right choice is to fight for it, you will only know that through leaving. So you have to trust whatever the call is. And never can one person do the work of two. So both people have to be in. I've worked with people who are, let's say, navigating infidelity. And the one person's still having the affair. And they're like, no, yeah, I'm all in. And then you find out they're having the affair and you're like, you're not all in. Like the work is not even, it's not productive when you're in that space. So it's like, how can both people come to agreement? And if one person says, I'm actually not all in, then that's freedom. And I know it's a painful freedom, but it's freedom because it's truth. And those are the kinds of truths that I'm here for. It's like if you're sick and you don't want to go to the doctor to find out you're sick, so you avoid the doctor, but the truth still exists. You might as well work with the truth. And relationally, it's the same thing. It's like, let's just be honest. Let's stop fucking around. Like, we got lives to live. Like, can we honor one another with reality? And you know, if a relationship's not for one person, it's not for the other. That's just a fact. Mm-hmm. But these are like, society doesn't celebrate that inquiry. Society says, stay for everything. I actually have a post that I'm right now reposting some of like my most popular posts. And one of them is about how we've been taught that relationship endings are failures. Mm-hmm. I have a friend the other day who has been dating someone, and the person keeps like being hot and cold. Like, I'm so all in, I love you too, I'm ready. I'm actually not ready, I'm working through stuff. And I'm like, red flag. But, you know, you let people walk their path. But he asked me about it, and I was like, listen, this is a red flag to me, because there's like a push and a pull going on, and this person is really dictating the depth of intimacy between you two. And you're not getting to. You're seeking clarity, but you're not creating clarity. Create clarity. What do you want? What do you desire? Call this person towards it. If they don't want it, great. So the relationship ended. And he said to me, I can't believe here I am again, a failure. Like, I want to master love, and here I am failing. And I said, this is mastery. Like, you still have the program in your head that if you guys were staying together and working on things, and she kept being hot and cold, that's success? And I was like, the only questions you ask are, did I show up? Did I do everything I could? And sometimes the answer will be no, right? So we have to live with that awareness and change. But I said to him, like, get rid of the idea that you not working is evidence that you suck. Instead, it's like actually evidence that you're great, because a relationship that couldn't hold this space is gone, which means another space, either it's with them or not, is in your future. You know, when we operate from a place of scarcity, like, I'm going to stay with this person because I'm afraid I'll never meet somebody. Mm-hmm. Well, then what happens is we end up living in scarcity. Mm-hmm. So like, the possibility can never arise. So we're always living in the pain of it not being realized, thinking like, oh, I live in abundance. And it's like, no, you don't. And that's okay. But just like, be with the truth that you're holding on to this because you're afraid. And then if you can just be with that, okay, I'm afraid. What am I afraid of? I'm afraid I'll never meet anybody. Great, go live in that. I remember Carolyn Mace saying, if I was your angel and you were afraid of being left, I'd have someone fall deeply in love with someone and have them leave you in 3 months. And I was like, well, that's a savage angel.
Yikes.
But imagine what you'd learn.
Yeah.
And we all have that all the time.
Wow. I mean, just those questions to ask yourself, like, is there still something here to learn? Am I abandoning myself if I stay or if I go? I mean, everything that you just said is so, and just the societal, as I've been thinking about this, reading your book, I was like, well, you know, this institution of marriage is kind of great because it's keeping people in a container where at least they're not just running and escaping, and like, it holds them to a certain accountability to like try to make something work. But most marriages, nobody's doing the correct work within them to get to 2.0, right? And to thrive. So, yeah.
Well, most marriages are built on like marriage. The origin of marriage is not to hold love,
right? Safety.
Yeah, it's to
security.
Get more in-laws.
Yeah,
you know,
like
bigger
dowry. And all
yeah,
that
it was
stuff, yeah.
like originally it was so you could trade resources with another tribe, walk safer distances. You know, eventually when agriculture came along and they had people who worked on land and people who owned land, it was about having the rich people marry rich people and the poor people marry poor people. So it was about resources, but about also hierarchy and socioeconomic statuses. And that's still obviously true today. So, you know, when I hear someone say, I never want to get married because I don't want to get divorced, I'm like, well, marriage isn't the cause of divorce. Like, obviously, linearly it is, right? You got to get married to get divorced. But the reason people get divorced is, well, maybe they pick someone they're not aligned to. Maybe they got married for different reasons. Maybe they've been married 20 years and all of a sudden they're different people. The original vows, which most of us just inherited vows, honor and obey. I couldn't imagine anyone. My wife would never have said that. Till death do us part. And I often bring this forward of like, what type of death? Like a metaphorical death or literal death? You know, I think there's something really sacred about saying, okay, Jordan Peterson has this line where he says, commitment only works if you do it. And I really do believe that. It's like, what happens if you had no option? But both people have to live with what happens if we had no option. Because if one other person's like, but we do have options, right? Then now they're not actually all in. But I think the technology of relationship is the most potent technology for, let's say, self-actualization. Because there's no faster way to recognize your inadequacies, you know, or possibilities than being in a relationship with someone. You know, and I think relationships have never been at a better place for what they're capable of being. But they're in a flux state because, as we talk about in the book, we have new world relationship expectations and desires trying to use old world skills. And it just doesn't work, you know?
In transition, last question for all my single peeps out there, asking for a friend, I would say, for a woman of, you know, early 40s or, you know, late 30s, all her friends have been married. She's never been married. She wants to have kids. There's the time pressure of that. You know, you have these brilliant questions to analyze if you should leave a relationship or not. But, you know, I've had conversations with girlfriends and it's like, how did, you know, that woman is awful to that guy. Like, why is that guy with her? You know, like we just can't wrap our head around how some people find themselves in relationships. And that are
why do they get a relationship?
Like crappy humans, you know,
Yeah.
and then this beautiful, kind-hearted. So what, I mean, obviously there's some belief of inadequacy or something underlying. I wouldn't, you know, presume to judge what that is, but what is some self-questioning or reflection that you could offer those people that are just seeking so badly for love and can't find it, like can't even find a guy to date on 2 years, you know?
Well, man, there's a lot of layers to that one. The first one I'll say is you don't want to get rid of the longing, right? Because if I just say, well, stop desiring relationship, it's like, okay, get out of here. It's like, hold on to the desire. And even you can center why you choose things in your life around that. The first thing I want to validate the experience of the biological clock, but I would say that the biological clock should be reason that you very early hold very high standards for your own behavior. You know, like you don't have time to fuck around. So it's like if you don't have time to fuck around, what are you doing with a booty call? Like if you don't have time to fuck around, why are you doing shit you don't like doing? Why are you with people you don't like? Why are you in spaces you shouldn't be in? I think this is true of everybody. I mean, when I worked as a rep in oncology, I remember being in a room where a guy was told that his cancer was terminal. And he had not heard that yet. And I remember being there like, oh my God. I witnessed his experience and I could feel the heaviness, the urgency of his life. And I remember then learning about survivorship, right? That when people find out that they're going to die, everything becomes important. Everything that their values become clear. What they're going to tolerate becomes clear. And I remember thinking to myself, what's the difference between someone who, like, how do we activate that without that?
Right.
And I asked this monk who's also a marriage and family therapist named Koshin Paley Ellison. And he said, well, the only difference between the two is one has accepted death. And I was like, oh my God, that's so profound. It's so simple. And I say that because, like, can you activate within yourself? If you have something that's powerful enough in you, you can engage in change very radically, right? If we have a health issue, radical change. But that's available to us in every moment. We just don't have the activating event.
Right.
So it's like, how do I create the activating event? So for me, to completely change my life, it was that I was writing about relationships, so I had to get into integrity with what I was writing. Because I'm like, well, I don't want someone to write a tell-all about me. I'll write a tell-all. Like, I don't want someone to say, like, he doesn't live that. I'll live it, so I don't have to worry about that. My accountability to change will be that. And that was the technology, the motivation that I knew I needed. I knew when I hit publish, shit better change. It better be changed the moment I hit publish. And I think the same is true. If heartbreak is the thing that makes you change your life, don't waste it. Like there's a saying from Francis Weller where he says, don't waste a good divorce. Don't waste a good diagnosis. And I'm like, yeah, that's the material. And so if having a biological clock gives me urgency, fucking use that urgency. Like, don't hate the pressure, love the pressure. And okay, if I was then going to look, it's like, okay, am I using my standards as a way to have walls? Because a lot of times the list of the things they want, one, they're not being, and two, the list is so strict because they are actually afraid of being hurt. And so what happens is they live in the pain of never relating because their standards are high. So then they get to blame their standards. Well, no one meets them. Have you seen the dating pool? Mm-hmm. Right? So now I date the dating pool. I remember seeing a meme. The dating pool has pee in it. I say that because what I often see, it doesn't matter the city someone lives in, I'll hear them say, well, dating in X city is the worst.
LA.
And of course everyone goes, oh, yeah, it is the worst. And that's great. If a bunch of people want to get together and drink Cabernet Sauvignon and complain about the dating pool, I don't care. But you're actually connecting on scarcity. You're connecting on pain. Like, be the one outlier who's like, nah. Because your life can change like that.
That's what I say. Yeah.
And I always say to people, like, a choice isn't just a choice. I remember I have this friend who, I just published this today, actually. I just wrote about it. She said to me, I have a booty call every Thursday, and I'm going to just have booty calls till I meet my guy. And I was like, that's great. Do you do whatever you want to do? And she's like, what do you think about it? I could tell you have thoughts. And I was like, I'm not saying this as a judgment. I used to do that till I got really clear on what I actually wanted to create with my life, and then was like, I'm not going to do anything that's not in alignment with that, because when I make choices that aren't in alignment with what I want to create, I'm sending mixed messages to myself and the world and the universe and God and soul, whatever your belief system is. But even if you think about it from a very linear, logical, scientific perspective, if every Thursday I'm at Bobby's house getting banged, that's the scientific term, getting banged, or banging, or Bobby. Maybe they're banging Bobby. Poor Bobby. Bobby's always a fuckboy. Isn't that funny? Okay, so we've got Thursday nights at Bobby's. But if I'm there, I'm not somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And first off, booty calls on Thursdays, like, give up on Monday. Thursday's a good night, you know? So I say all that, just like bringing some levity to it, because levity is important. It's like, can we laugh at our misalignments, but then change them? Because you might think Thursday nights at that house are just Thursday nights. But if you all of a sudden are like, what brings me joy? You know what? I've always wanted to join a hiking group. I've always wanted to learn how to paint. I've always wanted to, what brings me joy? Now you're in a place where someone else is also there bringing themselves joy. You might be in line at a coffee shop on the way to the thing, and your head isn't in your phone, and you're sitting there going, like, not going on Bumble in line at Starbucks or wherever, and you're like, and you're missing the world. And so if you start to pay attention to these micro choices, and this is the level of responsibility I'm talking about. I have a friend who's like, I'm not ready for that. And I'm like, that's great. Then, like, you're not ready to do it. That's okay. He, like, still is like, I'm going to live some life out of alignment. Great. I remember Ram Dass saying, like, you wake up to all the choices you're making that are not good for you, and then you go bowling, and it's not bowling anymore. Like, it just, and I think I laugh about that a lot, because we taste it, right? We, like, taste the possibility. We taste potential. We taste alignment. And then we go back. But you can't pretend you didn't taste it. And I'm like, follow that. But that often causes disruptions, of course, in our lives. And I think that's pursuing the thing we've always wanted. That's saying yes to things. That's saying no to things. But then instead of being, the black sheep of the family, which I really think is the person in the family inviting the family to healing, most of the time, you now are the person who's liberating the system. And if you get to that level of responsibility for your choices, you find yourself really in love with life. And then you meet people. And I've seen this happen over and over again. It's a tall order. And it's a tall order because the order that you're making is significant. And so we have to actually, like, explore all the things that we're afraid of with love. Because if you don't, like, the thing you want most is love, but the thing you're afraid of most lives right next door. So you can't walk towards love unless you walk towards pain. And, And you know that saying, grief is love that has nowhere to go, no place to go. I'm like, grief is just love, full stop, to me. Because every time you love someone, you are saying yes to losing them. So if you don't have capacity for loss, you don't have capacity for love. So like if I've never explored grief, then I can't go deeper. Because the only way to love someone more is to actually at the same time you are simultaneously losing them. And when I realized that, I'm like, well, I'm not here to fuck around. Like I feel this, I can get emotional just thinking about how much I love my wife, how much I love my child, how much I love my parents, how much I love my dog. Because I'm like signing up for that contract. And so like losing a relationship is not failing. Not being able to hold grief is not a failure, it's an opportunity. And to me, I just think about like, we always try to save people from feelings we don't know how to be with. And I was like, well, if you can learn the value of all these, then you won't try to rob anyone from them. You know what I mean?
I think that's a good place to drop the mic. That was really, yes, I do know what you mean. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. You're just such a grounded beacon of wisdom and experience. And I just really appreciate your sharing the path to liberated love and modeling with Kylie and now your beautiful baby. Is it a boy or girl?
Boy, Jasper.
Oh my God, so excited.
He's so fun.
It's the best.
He's so fun. Especially like learning that he has no judgments or preconceived notions of the world, so it's really pointing to mine. You know?
Yeah. I'm
like, oh, this is what it means to successfully play this game. And he's like, no, it isn't. You're supposed to throw everything.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
It exposes our rigidity and our judgments. Exactly. Yeah,
it does.
It's so great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So honored that you came on to share this. And I look forward to continuing to follow you and learn all about your parenting wisdom as well.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
No pressure.
We'll wait for that book. Yeah. Thanks so much. Awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. Oh, and if you found this episode inspiring, please rate, review, and share Heal with Kelly so that we can grow our audience and reach more people. We truly appreciate it. Lots of love.